want to give you some extra help, some strategies for overcoming these 5 especially difficult challenges. When you can learn to deal with them in a positive way, you can face anything else that life may have in store for you. Chapter 5. Discouragement. When it comes to attitude obstacles, let's start with the one that's like the Trojan horse of ancient myth, discouragement. If you let discouragement get inside you, it can conquer you from the inside out, and it will prevent you from achieving the success you desire. Don't misunderstand, everyone gets discouraged from time to time. Seldom does a day go by in my life without some discouraging thing happening to me. And then there are those times when you know it's going to be one of those days. I recently came across a humorous piece that tells about those days when it would be better just to stay in bed. You know it's going to be a bad day when you turn on the morning news and it's showing emergency routes out of town. The sun comes up in the west. Your boss tells you not to bother taking off your coat. You jump out of bed and you miss the floor. The bird singing outside your bedroom window is a buzzard. You wake up and your dentures are locked together. The car's horn gets stuck while you're following a group of Hell's Angels. You put both contact lenses in the same eye. You walk to work on a sunny morning and discover the back of your skirt is stuck in your pantyhose. You call to pick up your messages, and you're told it's none of your business. Your tax return check bounces. You put your bra on backwards, and it fits better. You step on the scale, and it says tilt. You call suicide prevention, and they put you on hold. As I've already mentioned, no one should expect life to be smooth sailing. Sidney J. Harris says, "When I hear somebody sigh, 'Life is hard,' I am always tempted to ask, compared to what? Think about the alternative. If only life could become easier with everyday living. But that's not reality, is it? As you get older, truly some things get harder, but others also get easier. In every stage of life, there are good aspects and bad. The key is to focus on the good and learn to live with the bad. Of course, not everybody does that. In fact, I've found that there are really only 2 kinds of people in this world when it comes to dealing with discouragement: splatters and bouncers. When splatters hit rock bottom, they fall apart, and they stick to the bottom like glue. On the other hand, when bouncers hit bottom, they pull together and bounce back. Paul J. Meyer, founder of the Success Motivation Institute, says, 90% of those who fail are not actually defeated. They simply quit. That's what discouragement can do if you don't handle it the right way. It can cause you to quit. Since you will become discouraged at some point, the question is, are you going to give up or get up? Dealing effectively with discouragement. The difference maker between splatters and bouncers is having the right attitude. If you believe in yourself, see discouragement as temporary, and handle it the right way, you can bounce back from nearly anything. Here are 5 steps you can take that will help you to deal effectively with discouragement. 1. Get the right perspective. One of my favorite illustrations on perspective is something I came across years ago and like to use in conferences. It's in the form of a letter home from a girl at college. Dear Mom, since I have been away at college 1 full semester, I think it's time to bring you up to date as to what is going on. Shortly after I arrived at college, I got bored with dormitory life and stole $50 from my roommate's purse. With the money, I rented a motorcycle, which I crashed into a telephone pole a few blocks from the dorm. I broke my leg in the accident, but I was rescued by the young doctor who lives upstairs in the apartment house on the corner. He took me in, set my leg, nursed me back to health, and thanks to him, I'm up and around again. We wanted to let you know that we're going to be married as soon as possible. Unfortunately, we're having some trouble with the blood test. They're not sure what the disease is, but it keeps showing up in the test. We hope to get that worked out quickly so that we'll be married before the baby arrives. Shortly thereafter, we will be home to live with you and Dad. And I just know you will learn to love the baby as much as you love me, even though the baby's dad is a different religion and wants us to convert. Please understand, the only reason we're coming back home to stay is that my husband-to-be got tossed out of medical school because he was too busy taking care of me to complete his work. Really, Mom, I didn't steal any money or rent a motorcycle or hit a telephone pole or break my leg. I didn't need a young doctor. There's no disease, and I'm not expecting a baby. And I won't be coming home to live with you and Dad either. However, I am getting a D in algebra and an F in geology, and I wanted you to accept these grades in their proper perspective. Take a good look at the whole picture. A man stopped to watch a Little League baseball game. He asked one of the players on the bench what the score was. "We're behind 18-0, the boy answered. "Well," remarked the man, "I have to say, you sure don't look discouraged." "Discouraged?" the boy said, puzzled. "Why should we be? We haven't come up to bat yet." For most people, the game of life is long, and we receive many opportunities to learn, to achieve, to serve, and to make amends for our mistakes. Take heart. No matter how dark things may seem at any given moment, there are always reasons to hope. Take a short look at the problem. After the Civil War, former Confederate General Robert E. Lee visited the beautiful home of a wealthy Kentucky widow. After lunch, she invited Lee to join her on the porch. From there, she pointed to a once majestic magnolia tree that had been badly burned by Northern artillery fire. The woman began to cry as she described the former magnificence of the tree that had shaded her home for generations. She expected Lee to condemn the Northern troops and sympathize with her loss. Finally, Lee said, "My dear madam, cut it down and forget it." Someone once said, "To hatch despair, just brood over your troubles." Many people who experience setbacks ask why, but never move beyond that. Certainly, you can't solve your problems by ignoring them, but you can't solve them by becoming fixated on them either. Once you recognize the problem, you need to focus your attention on solutions. Take a close look at yourself. A man in his early 60s had just retired to Corydon, Kentucky. During his lifetime, he had worked as a farmer, streetcar conductor, soldier, railroad fireman, ferry boat operator, salesman, and service station operator. His latest venture had been cooking chicken. He had cooked from the time he was a boy of 6 when his father died. He sold fried chicken at the gas station, and it had become so popular that he had moved his operation to a motel and restaurant across the street. But in the early 1950s, planned interstate would bypass his operation. He sold off his operation, paid his bills, and faced living on a $105 a month Social Security check. He wasn't ready to give up on life, not just yet. He took stock of his assets. He knew that others loved his chicken. In fact, in 1935, Kentucky's governor, Ruby Laffoon, had made the man an honorary Kentucky colonel. From then on, he called himself Colonel Sanders and had dressed the part. Sanders decided to travel across the country cooking his chicken and making deals with restaurant owners. He would provide his blend of 11 herbs and spices, and the restaurant owners would pay him a royalty every time they sold chicken cooked with his recipe. In 1964, Sanders had made more than 600 franchise outlets for his chicken. That was the year he retired again. At the age of 74, he sold his interest in the Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants for $2 million. But he didn't quit working. He became a marketing representative for the organization, which soon turned into a worldwide operation. He continued working for the restaurant chain, traveling 250,000 miles a year up until his death at age 90. When you face discouragement, you can do one of two things, and the one you choose will color your perspective. You can look at others to place the blame, or you can look at yourself to discover your opportunities. The choice is yours. Take a look at successful people. One of the best ways to learn to have a positive attitude and achieve success is to study successful people and learn from them. That's what Napoleon Hill, author of Think and Grow Rich, did. He studied the lives of more than 500 successful people and got to know many of them personally. What he found was that they all shared one trait: persistence. The most successful people have often overcome the greatest obstacles. Their success hadn't come from their circumstances. It had come from their attitudes. Take a wide look at the possibilities. In most sets of negative circumstances lie positive possibilities. It's said that when Lewis Waterman couldn't get a fountain pen to work when he needed a signature to close a deal, he went away and developed a fountain pen that bore his name. It became the premier writing instrument in the U.S. for 50 years. When Alexander Fleming had a bunch of cultures he was working on at St. Mary's Hospital in London ruined by an open window, the resulting mold on some of them led him to the discovery of penicillin. It is very likely that if you are facing something negative right now, there is an opportunity contained in it somewhere, somehow. It may not be easy to find. It may not outweigh the difficulty or lead to a major breakthrough as it did for Waterman and Fleming. Then again, it might. How will you ever know if you don't choose to adopt the right perspective and try to find it? 2. See the right people. Few things are better at helping someone overcome discouragement than spending time with the right person. Some people just lift you up. They help you to have hope or feel good about yourself. Poet Walt Whitman found such a person when he was a young man struggling to get anyone interested in his writing. In 1855, he published Leaves of Grass, a small volume of poetry. Because none of the big publishing houses would accept it, he paid neighborhood printers to produce 795 copies of it. It received little notice or acclaim from critics, and it didn't sell. He couldn't get rid of it, said Karen Colindale, a Whitman professor at New York University. The price was $2. Then it went down to $1. Then 50 cents. However, Whitman did receive a note of encouragement from someone. It said, "Dear Sir, I am not blind to the worth of the wonderful gift of Leaves of Grass. I find it the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed. I greet you at the beginning of a great career." Who was this encourager? None other than Ralph Waldo Emerson, the most respected literary figure of the day in America. I am very fortunate because I grew up in the home of a lifter, father, John Maxwell. He really understands women and cares about them. When I was a teenager, he used to tell me, "Remember, everyone you come into contact with is fighting a battle." In his 80s and retired from pastoral ministry, he continues to be a lifter. When he moved to a retirement community several years ago, he started to connect with people in his community to encourage them and lend them a hand if they needed it. He had his golf cart and his cell phone, and he was always on the move. That first year, he asked me if I would be willing to speak to a couple of dozen people in his community if he got them together, just to encourage them, which I was glad to do. 5 years later, Dad has enlisted volunteers to help him and is active in 37 retirement communities. This year, when I spoke to his group, there were over 600. Why has Dad been so successful? 2 reasons. First, he's a leader. He has always had the ability to make things happen. Second, he cares about people and lifts them up. If people feel discouraged, all they need to do is spend time with Dad to improve their attitude. 3. Say the right words. A main source of discouragement is negative self-talk. Doctor and great British preacher Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones says in his book, Spiritual Depression, "Most of your unhappiness in life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself rather than talking to yourself." By that, I think he means that we often passively allow negative messages from our past to influence our thinking, instead of actively telling ourselves good things that will help us to think more positively. For years, I've used phrases such as these to help me. This too shall pass. Things could be worse. It's not what happens to me, but what happens in me that matters most. Keep your chin up. Do it anyway. You need to find your own phrases in a language that works for you, but be sure that the language is positively motivational, not negative or belittling. Nobody can motivate himself in a positive direction by continually using negative words. 4. Have the right expectations. Clergyman J. Wallace Hamilton once observed, "Every person's life is a diary in which he or she means to write one story and is forced to write yet another." Haven't you found that to be true? I know I have. Here's the good news. The story you write can actually be better than the one you envision, but you need to have the right expectations. You have to remain flexible, and you can't expect everything to go perfectly. Lawrence R. Burns, a psychology professor at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan, makes the distinction between negative and positive perfectionists. He says that negative perfectionists are concerned with trying to impress, and as a result are often depressed, anxious, and obsessed with their flaws. Positive perfectionists, on the other hand, set realistic goals and forgive themselves when they fall short. And Burns says it is possible for a person to shift from one to the other. The key is to focus on what you can achieve, not what you can't. 5. Make the right decisions. Do you ever feel worn out by the end of the day? Maybe it's because you are making decisions that cause you to expend your energy the wrong way. Take a look at the following list of activities reputed to have come from the Southern California Medical Association, and the number of calories each burns to see if that may be the problem. Beating around the bush burns 75 calories. Jogging your memory burns 125 calories. Jumping to conclusions burns 100 calories. Climbing the wall burns 150 calories. Swallowing your pride burns 150 calories. Passing the buck burns 5 calories. Beating your own drum burns 100 calories. Throwing your weight around burns 300 calories. Turning the other cheek burns 75 calories. Dragging your heels burns 100 calories. Throwing in the towel burns 200 calories. Seriously, the decisions you make and how you make them have a huge impact on your outlook. First, it's important always to do the right thing. Few things increase discouragement the way regret or a guilty conscience can. It's not easy to apologize, admit your faults, forgive, subdue your temper, shoulder a deserved blame, or start over. But making the decision to do these things when they're called for always pays off. Each of us needs to be willing to look at life realistically, see ourselves as we are, and come to terms with what's true. Second, the timing of the decision is also important. Many people make decisions when things aren't going well. They look for relief in the despair of the valley instead of waiting for the clarity that comes from being on the mountaintop. Why? Because it takes a lot of effort to get to the mountaintop. And when you're experiencing the darkness of the valley, it's always tempting to make changes that you hope will relieve the discomfort. Robert Schuller, founder of the Crystal Cathedral in Orange, California, calls this the peak-to-peak principle. When you are on top of the proverbial mountain, that is the time to make decisions. Here's why. You can see your situation more clearly. You are moving to something, not just from something. You leave those around you in a better position. You decide using positive data, not negative. You are more likely to move from peak to peak instead of valley to valley. On the other hand, when you're in the valley, the most important thing you can do is persevere. If you keep fighting, you're likely to get your second wind. just as distance runners do. And it's said that only when runners are exhausted enough to reach that place do they find out what they can truly accomplish. If you keep persevering while you're in the valley, not only will you likely make it to higher ground, where you can make better decisions, but you will also have developed character, which will serve you well throughout life. Many years ago, I came across the poetry of Helen Steiner Rice, and it intrigued me because it seemed to be characterized by hope in the midst of pain or sorrow. When I learned about her story, it made sense to me. Helen was born in 1900 and grew up on the shores of Lake Erie. Her dream was to study law, but her plans to attend Wesleyan College had to be set aside when her father died during the influenza epidemic of 1918. Instead, she ended up taking a job with an electrical utility company. In 1928, Helen met a young banker named Franklin Rice. Soon, they were married, but their happiness together was short-lived. In the wake of the stock market crash of 1929, Franklin committed suicide. Helen went back to work, this time taking a job editing greeting cards. For 20 years, she worked in the industry, with some of her poems being published by the Gibson Card Company. And she worked and maintained a grateful attitude despite suffering a painful degenerative disease. Then one day, one of her cards was read on the Lawrence Welk Show. Her life suddenly changed. People clamored for her poetry. Since then, people have bought more than 7 million books of her writing. She died in 1981, but one of the poems she published before her death describes a discovery she made when facing dark times. The poem is called The Bend in the Road, and it ends this way. And together we stand at life's crossroads and view what we think is the end. But God has a much bigger vision, and He tells us it's only a bend. For the road goes on and is smooth, and the pause in the song is a rest, and the part that's unsung and unfinished is the sweetest and richest and best.